Eugenie Sage.
Tanaka, Mr Chair, thank you. Mr Chair, it is bizarre that we are debating this bill under urgency when it doesn't come into force until the 1st of January 2017 and Part 2 doesn't come into force until the 1st of January 2019. Why are we debating it under urgency? Is that because the government was too scared to call for submissions and have public debate on the lack of any decent progress towards tackling our emissions to reducing climate pollution? Because, Mr Chair, one of the most inspiring government-organised meetings I've been to about climate change was the government's consultation meeting last year on New Zealand's emission targets before we went to Paris. It wasn't inspiring for the video which the Ministry for the Environment showed, which was incredibly defeatist about the obstacles to a low-carbon future, but it was inspiring because hundreds of people came. Hundreds of people there were still wanting to speak at the end of the 2-hour meeting. They had plenty to say about what we could be doing to reduce climate pollution in New Zealand. And that's where the government totally fails to get it. As James Shaw said, it doesn't get climate change. It also doesn't get the desire of New Zealanders all around this country of ours to do something definite, to have a plan about reducing our emissions. People want a stable climate. They want to protect our future and the future of their children and their children's children. They want to protect the basis of our economy. People want a plan. This government, with this damp squib of a bill, is failing to provide that leadership. People all around New Zealand are getting loud on the climate. We have seen that with the break-free actions to move away from fossil fuels that we've seen over recent weeks. Yet this bill will only reduce our emissions by 0.7%. That's not good enough when we've got a target of reducing emissions by 11%. And it was really interesting, Mr Chair, to have a look at the regulatory impact statement. One of the reasons for this delay in implementation is because of what has been described as the risk of increased costs to the dairy sector. And those costs are, of course, because agriculture is totally exempt from the ETS, those costs are to the processors. Fonterra, the milk processing companies, because they use coal to dry the milk. And those costs are passed on a wee bit to the suppliers. The regulatory impact statements estimates that there will be an increase of cost between $1,500 and $5,000 a year for the average dairy farmer. And because of the losses that dairy farmers are expected to make in the current season, this was seen as one of the factors in delaying the implementation of the bill. But, Mr Chair, that sums up what is wrong about the government's whole approach to climate pollution. It is not giving the incentives to change. There was a very good presentation in the Parliament last night, or in the buildings outside the chamber, from Apiculture New Zealand. The plan to actually plant manuka over large areas to increase our bee industry, to increase the income we get from honey exports and make that a billion-dollar industry. Yet this bill and the government's failure to lead on climate mean that we're not getting that encouragement of a change in land use to move away from climate pollution land uses such as agriculture and dairying, with the major methane and nitrous oxide emissions that we get from cows. Bees don't produce nitrous oxide or methane. If we had a decent climate plan, we would get a shift in land use away from dairying to much more sustainable land uses across Aotearoa New Zealand. But by failing to lead, the government is stifling innovation. It is leaving us stuck with climate-polluting activities like intensive dairying. That's why this bill really fails, Mr Speaker. We are supporting it in the Green Party because it is a baby step, but it is completely timid and it fails to listen to New Zealanders around the country who want leadership on climate change in the same way that we have led in terms of being nuclear-free and led in women getting the right to vote. This bill fails to lead.